Hey free-to-play gang, how's it going? Today we will take a look at all the espers in a game and briefly cover every single one of them and where I feel they deserve to be placed on this tier list. So do take note that this tier list is entirely based on my opinion and my experience with the game, and things could be very different between myself and someone else who could potentially have even more knowledge in the game. So with that said, if you found you enjoyed this video, then do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, as it would show me that you value this content, which would encourage me to make a little bit more of such videos in the future. And subscribing is also free and you can always change your mind in the future. Now with that said, this is going to be a long ass video, so sit back, relax and grab yourself a cup of coffee because we are going right in. Okay, so first up, we're going to start with the rare espers, and then we're going to follow up with the epic espers, and finally the legendary espers. And afterwards, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the new espers and where I would place them in the tier list itself. So we're going to start off with the rare esper, starting with Bai Liuli. So after the recent patch, she received a pretty sizable buff. So she now has an AoE single strip with a seer debuff, which can potentially set up some massive cleave. Her usefulness probably lies in PvE, specifically the Temporal Tower, more so than PvP due to the presence of Gabrielle providing 2 buffs, which makes it difficult to strip the immunity of your targets to land a seer debuff. So I'm just going to chuck her at A. Moving on to Bardon, an interesting revenge kit that retaliates against enemy attacks on your weakened allies. However, he doesn't perform well due to the low probability to taunt and the wide plethora of immunity espers in PvP. So a great idea for a tank, but very poor in function C, basically unusable. Next we have Berenice, so very useful first skill with a strong chance to land defense breaks. She can also control AP with her second skill and is the only esper in the game that can deploy such a massive shield buff. So she's a great esper with a very cheap cost as well, and is especially good for Chronos, Fafnir and Temporal Tower, as the shield also somehow mitigates Loyan's HP cap reduction debuff. So do take note that it actually mitigates the HP cap reduction debuff. So S tier for Berenice. Next we have Brynn, so she is a DPS esper with a freeze and a defense break on her third skill, and an attack buff on her second skill. However, she neither excels at DPS, controlling, debuffing, nor buffing. There are Jeanne, Berenice, Suhua in the game for those roles, so I'm going to chuck her at C tier. Next we have Chalmers, so he is a very powerful esper capable of doing copious amounts of damage, scaling off the enemy's HP. However, due to his self-destructive third skill, he becomes a prime target against the AI, which makes him a poor choice in the Temporal Tower in my opinion. So he finds a lot of use only in the endgame Chronos and APAT builds, not really recommended for the early game, so I do use him myself. I'll put him at A tier for that. Following Chalmers, we now have Changpu, so decent for the early game immunity, but her heal scales off attack instead of HP, so scales off attack, which makes her either a terrible healer or a fragile one, because I'll always recommend players to build their healers with HP and speed. So B for me. Now next, David. Okay, so Weak Trash, who unfortunately shares my name C tier. And Drew, so this is actually one of my most favorite rare espers, an amazing esper, great for all levels in the game and for all content as well. He has a regular defense break on his second skill and a third skill capable of sweeping waves in the Ritual Miracle, as well as triple killing in the point wall, which is always nice to see. Next we have Freddy, so he is a powerful esper that excels in beating APAP and Chronos. However, his DPS only benefits from having a lower HP, which is then maintained by first having Hades relics. So in other words, you need a functioning APAP team before investing into him, which makes him a great choice only as a means of improving runtimes at the end game. He also benefits greatly from Ocean Waves to upkeep his second skill and to achieve an RNG permanent attack and standoff buff for PvP, but as you can see, both Ocean Waves and Hades are APAP relics, so he's not so much of an early game esper. Next we have Hall, so he's a unique esper with the ability to follow up single attacks with his own. Initially he seemed promising for Fafnir, but it became very evident that there were many issues with him, such as having low passive DPS, or having his passive not activate when your allies use heals or AoE attacks. So instead, I think, you know what, just use Zelma, she's a little bit better than him. And next we have Helena. This is an easy C tier for me. She tries really hard to juggle healing and AP control, but unfortunately she sucks at both. She also lacks any form of immunity or purification. And next we have Jeanne, so she's a triple stunner. This is the only esper in the game with triple stuns, and she has a buff Dispeller on her third skill as well, which is really good for PvP, so you can instantly stun anyone in the game. So due to her utility, I think she deserves a rather high tier, and I'm gonna chuck her at A tier because of how useful she is. Okay, next up we have Lauren. She used to be very strong for Temporal Tower due to a large healing capacity, coupled with a regular revive. However, she was beaten to the dirt from a few patches ago and is no longer as useful as she was, as her healing power is simply now laughable. So I'm gonna put her at B tier. Next up, we have Layla. So do not get me wrong for her rating over here, okay? So I think she deserves a much better spot than at C. I think maybe she deserves an A even. However, the game punishes poison espers by throwing around a ton of free immunity espers and of course purification espers everywhere for PvP and even in the temporal tower. So I'm going to chuck her at a C. The developers really need to rework the game a little bit in this aspect for her to be useful. So as for the Ritual Miracle, she can be used there, but sometimes, you know, she becomes an additional investment cost when you can just build a normal DPS Esper for all the other generic content use. Next up, we have Leon. Okay, so he has a lot of potential, but is set back by his element. Being a flow DPS makes him unusable in APAP, so he only sees use as a Chronos Destroyer. He is good, but he is too much of an investment to be worth considering, especially for the newer players, so B tier for me. Liao, unfortunately for him, his Dispel is separate from his Devour skill, which is very unlike Jeanne. Okay, so Jeanne, her third skill is a Dispel and a Stun at the same time. However, he is saved by his 20% PvP speed lead, which is why I'm putting it at A tier. Now next, Melanie. Okay, so she is a very useful AP manipulator with a petrification kit with a broken passive that allows her to petrify enemies every single turn that she takes, so the passive cooldown doesn't actually work. She also has a global 15% speed lead, which can be quite useful in a few situations, so I'm gonna put her as an S tier. Maybe she deserves an A, but you know, I think S is pretty good for her right now. Okay, next we have Q. He could have a little bit more potential if not for the fact that this game absolutely hates debuffers. However, he sees use in content where his third skill can be abused. In fact, he is promising in Chronos and APAP when run alongside massive AoE espers like Chloe, Lin Xiao, and Li Ling, so I'm going to put him at B tier. Next one, we have Tang Yun. This is going to be a little bit more sensitive because some people are going to assume they're going to put him at an S tier or maybe even a double S. No, probably not double S, but maybe S tier, but I'm going to put him at an A tier. So he has a powerful kit and will be rated S if not for his awkward typing. He's a wind type. So if he were to be a flow esper instead, he could be used in both Fafnir and Chronos. However, he is not useful in APAP at all due to the multi-hitting and isn't viable for Chronos due to his typing. So there are much more better options in DPS or crowd controlling in the Temporal Tower as well. Next one, we have Anki Chai. So he's basically the only cooldown reduction Esper in the game that performs very well for PvE. I'm not going to consider the 2-star Esper because I think that 2-star Esper is not as good as Anki Chai. However, he is strictly offensive and has nothing in the department for protective support. In most cases, I think Su Hua prevails, so I'm going to put Anki Chai at A tier, and Su Hua, who is a lot better than Anki Chai in that aspect, is going to be in S tier. So Su Hua has a strong upkeep of attack and defense buffs with an invincibility and a heal on her second skill with a useful attack debuff on her first skill. So she is by far one of the most widely used Espers in the game for obvious reasons. And for the final 3-star Esper, we have Zelma. So she is decent for multi-hitting Fafnir, but does not excel at it due to the instability of ensuring that Fafnir stays debuffed for a third skill to do anything remotely damaging. So she is also limited in use to Fafnir and not much elsewhere, which I think I would just chuck her at a C tier. You don't really want to build her. You can definitely build Tang Yun instead, or you can build some of the better 4-star Espers if you already have them. Now that's it for the rare Espers. We are going to move on to the epic Espers. We are starting off with Alexa. So she is an Esper that only has a bad reputation because people do not understand her value. So she can perform as a buff dispeller in PvP due to her second skill, which shares the same proc rate as Lucas. People tend to forget that she has the same proc rate as Lucas. She also has a very nifty reflect buff that can turn the tide in PvP and be useful in Suicide APAP builds. So I think she deserves an A tier. Next, Anesidora. Okay, so this one, honestly, in my opinion, deserves an S tier, if not for the fact that the game hits debuffers. So, strong to say the least, her third skill is guaranteed to be deployed as it bypasses accuracy checks. You do not actually need accuracy for a third skill to land. However, the stun from a third skill's debuff can be resisted, but the damage cannot. So this makes her very strong in the Temporal Tower and the Cube Miracles, so long as the debuffs are not purified or prevented by immunity. However, her two other skills lack a lot of synergy for her main purpose, which is her third skill, and she also lacks viability in boss fights, so she isn't that good for Ritual Miracles and boss floors of the Temporal Tower, so therefore I'm just going to chuck her at A. Following up with her, we have Arcana. So he used to be dirt useless, but ever since he received a buff from a recent patch, he is still dirt useless. And next, Asenath. So even though with the recent nerf to exclude healing from a third skill, she still proves to be as useful as before. So she was never much of a healer for me to begin with, and her main selling point for me was the damage mitigation of Lotus Mark buff, which reduces incoming damage by 50%, and the AP push within the single third skill that she has. So I wouldn't consider her nerfed, I would just say that she was rebalanced. She's an easy S. Next up we have Bonnie. Okay, so for Bonnie, the recent patch made her highly viable in PvP. She has nearly top speed amongst all Espers, so she can be a reliable first turn Havoc in PvP. She also has a use in Temporal Tower to control the cooldowns of your enemies, so she's very useful right now, deserves an S tier. Next we have Catherine. Okay, so she's an Esper with a very specific niche use in PvP, where she makes tanky comps so much scarier and tankier, yet at the same time make it difficult for weaker Espers to be smothered in the first turn due to her standoff buff. So her passive Purify come AP push is simply blasphemous, she deserves an S tier. Now Celine, okay, so the recent patch was extra generous to her, giving her second and third skills much more utility. She is now one of the few Espers with a team speed buff with a Purify to boot, and her third skill can be very reliable in the Temporal Tower as well with a 100% chance to sleep the enemies. Next we have Chloe, so she's an Esper with the potential to summon death on her enemies. As a DPS Esper, it is invaluable that not only does she dispel buffs, her output is also based on gathering more buffs. So she's very meta right now because she can absorb other Esper's buffs. And her second skill, while weak in damage, lengthens the buffs on herself, which can be very powerful in PvP when delaying invincibility, immunity, and shields on herself. So she's a great counter against Gabriel comps, and stopped only by the legendary Dona, which I'll talk about in a bit. Next we have Dahlia. Okay, so she's an Esper that sees very little use in the current meta due to her buff being the least important in the game. It also hurts that her first two skills see little use in PvE, however she's a demigod when run together with Narmer, making her an excellent choice in Narmer Cleave comps, be it in PvP or the Temporal Tower, so because she's useful, I will still put her at a B tier and not C tier where most of these other Espers are completely unusable. Next up we have Joser, so he's an Esper with an interesting passive that makes him tankier the more he gets hit, which then explodes into a powerful attack and massive heal. However, this is not nearly the case as his damage output is laughable and he lacks immunity or any kind of protective buff. So his third skill also takes way too long to recharge and therefore he is quite useless in my opinion. He deserves a C tier. And next we have Ira, so she is a strong Esper with the ability to AoE speed debuff and AoE AP reduce in one single skill, and the ability to generate a lot of AP to one ally on her second skill. She is highly viable alongside Celine, so she deserves S tier. And then next we have Fabrice. He is a strong support who is also free right now, who sees viability in every single content in the game, be it PvP or PvE. So him being a free fusion Esper is simply just a cherry on top, definite S tier. Next we have Falcon, so this is a bit sensitive, I'm going to put him at C tier. Previously the developers actually mentioned that he's going to get a certain buff, which in the end didn't come true because the developers stealthily changed the wording in the update details. So he was so close to becoming a double S tier, but now he's just a C tier for me. Next up we have Hengrie. She is one of the best healers in the game with plenty of Purify in her kit, works amazing at just 5 stars due to a high base HP, so easy S tier. And then Jacob. Okay, so even though I really like Jacob, I have to be honest about him. Okay, so he is an Esper that makes two content very easy. So number one is the chapter 12-8 and number two is APEP. These two content poison you like crazy. However, he sees very little use elsewhere and I would not consider clearing chapter 12-8 to be relevant in his rating. So he's only really useful in APEP in my opinion, which then puts him at B tier because he's not so good of an investment, especially for early gamers. Next up we have Jiangman. So from the recent patch, she is now a powerhouse in APEP and useful in Temporal Tower so long as her debuffs are not purified, which is gonna happen most of the time. But otherwise, if she can effectively play her role well, she would definitely be an A tier for me. Now next, Kara. Okay, so she's a better version of Layla in terms of poison debuffs, but then again, the game hates debuffers, so B tier, just to emphasize that she's a little bit better than Layla. And next one we have Kaylee. She's a good DPS with an additional purpose for crowd control, so very viable in Temporal Tower and Chronos. Definitely an A tier. Okay, and True Gods are hard to come by, and Lin Xiao, okay, so she makes the cut for the first SS ranker. So with no need for crit rate investment, she is extremely easy to build and can reach absurd numbers even for new players. So she is not only viable but excellent in every single content in the game with her huge damage output, AoE defense break, AoE speed debuff, and AP control on her first skill. She is very powerful. Next we have Longmian. He's simply a god of crowd control with a 20% global speed lead, not much is needed to be said here. And next, Louis. Okay, so he's one of the best damage dealers for Fafnir, but lacks usefulness in every other content, and to be honest, Fafnir is not really a content that people want to clear as well. It's not really that necessary in my opinion, so B tier. Next, Luoyan. Okay, so he has a reliable HP cap reducer that actually bypasses immunity, so you can use this against immune enemies, which is potentially very relevant against tanky PvP comps. And the HP cap reduction cannot be purified and can only be resisted. So he finds use in Temporal Tower and is essentially a turn 1 30% HP nuker. So A tier for me. Next, Lin. Okay, so she's another Esper that is limited to Fafnir, but honestly I think she's not as good as Louis, so I might want to put her as C tier, but then again she's not necessarily on the same level as a Zelmer, so B tier for me. Next one, Mona, so a good and well-rounded fodder farmer that excels with the tutorial relics for a good majority of your farming needs. So she sees very little relevance elsewhere though, so I'm gonna put her, well, at A just because she's really good for her farming. And next one, Pritzker, a strong crowd controller with a passive that bypasses immunity. So his passive bypasses immunity, I have to repeat that, okay? To increase the cooldowns of your enemies. He is best paired with other espers that can dispel and crowd control, just like Lucas. So I'm gonna put him at an A tier just because he needs other espers to be fully functionable. And next, Renzi. Okay, so he's a tanky esper that has the potential to do huge AoE nukes. He also has a passive that gives him standoff buff prior to fatality, which also conveniently charges his AoE attack again for free. So he has a few weaknesses apart from Chloe and is widely used in tier 16 of the point wall. I think he deserves an S tier just because he's so powerful. Next one we have Sander, a flexible esper that can be built for two ways, okay? So one is AP control, the other is immense damage. So his damage scales off speed, which makes him a powerful and consistent nuker in many contents in the game. He also has a 25% Ritual and Sonic Miracle speed lead. He is also relevant in Temporal Tower and Cube Miracle for his ability to control AP very well, so S tier for me. And finally, for the last 4-star Esper, or rather the Epic Esper, we have Taylor. So he has the potential to do big hits and steal turns from killing his attackers with Avatara Relic set. He is also the only Esper capable of inflicting permadeath now, but this is not such a big deal when the revivers are all subpar. So he can be viable for fodder farming as well with Hades, but is reduced to a mere basic DPS in the Ritual Miracle, so in terms of his complete utility, I think he deserves a B tier. And now on to the legendary espers, we are going to begin with Bion Dina. So she's not a bad esper at all, although she could do with some proper buff rebalancing. She has the capability to nuke very hard with a defense ignoring AoE attack so long as you have the right setup. Okay, so however, apart from PvP, she sees little to no viability in every other content. So just because of that, I'm going to put her at a B tier, but in terms of PvP, she's actually quite strong. Next one we have Cecilia. Okay, so I would definitely put Cecilia at C rank if not for her passive. And her passive is her main selling point, which revives all dead allies on death and further boosts every ally by 50% AP. So this may sound good on paper, but the thing is, dead espers are revived with 0% AP, so they effectively respawn with only 50% AP and is not nearly enough to counter cleave. 50% AP is not enough, you need 100% AP. They also revive with very little HP and can be swept clean again with a well-timed AoE attack. In addition, she is almost just a sitting duck waiting for her passive to trigger, as she does very little otherwise. In this sense, this PvP based Esper weakens your lineup by turning into a 4v5 match, so I'm gonna put her at B. I don't think she deserves anything higher than that until they fix her. It's kinda sad that she's a Shima Netfire as well. But moving on, next we have Clara, so she is simply the god of healing. She is such a monster in PvP, be it for setting up a cleave or for persisting your tanky comps. Her power expands elsewhere into the domain of PvE as well, and many a time she single-handedly ensures the survivability of your team through her seemingly infinite healing, purification, shielding, immunity buffing. So she is also 3 speed away from becoming one of the fastest espers, and therefore definite double S for me. Next one we have Dona, so he sees a lot more use in PvP, but is also extremely cheap alternative for farming Purgatory 12. He can also single-handedly solo Chronos 10, well given that you have the right relic set, allowing you to level up fodders while you grind away at farming relics, so S rank for me. Next one, Gabrielle. Okay, so with her AoE defense break, AoE attack debuff, team-wide defense buff, and team-wide immunity buff, and having the highest speed in the game, she is one of the best initiators for PvP, if not the best initiator for PvP, and she sees incredible utility in almost all content, save for Chronos. I think she falls short in Chronos. Her first skill, while generally unimpressive, scales off her speed and can potentially serve as a decent cleanup, so double S. Next up we have Hyde, so this is kind of a tough one. He can solo a lot of content in the game, and with the recent patch he becomes even harder to defeat, making it easier for him to achieve his goals. However, he does not do a whole lot for your team and is usually a rather isolated individual for content as he cannot receive buffs. With that said, he serves as possibly the strongest contender against Fafnir and a good safety net in APEP to ensure an eventual victory, so because of that I'm going to put him at A tier, no higher, no lower. And next one we have Jin Yu Yao, so this is actually one of my espers that I have fully built, fully skilled up as well, so I understand her very deeply. She used to be the queen of Astral Witchcraft, but due to the recent changes of how Astral Witchcraft now currently works, she is no longer able to abuse the relic to its entirety, which completely decimates the sole purpose of a kit. So she has fallen as a PvP champion into the pits of dog shit basically. I'll put her at C tier right now. Next one we have Louis, so he's a very easy to build starter Esper because he has self-crit buff and a crit rate leader buff with incredible bossing potential. He also doubles as a fodder farmer should you need to conserve on relic investing. So his typing makes him good for ritual miracles and pretty decent for sniping prime targets in the cube miracle, so I'm gonna put him at A tier. Next we have Liling, so he is possibly one of the better damage dealers in the game with an incredible burst of AoE and single target DPS. So he is widely used across all content and comes with a 30% attack lead to clear your runs that much faster as well. He has a good mix of nuke with his true damage capabilities and self-sustain from his powerful second skill, so double S. This is actually just my opinion. I don't think a lot of people are putting a double S, but for me, I think he deserves this spot. Next up we have Lucas, so this is the new Spatial 100 Esper. The recent patch definitely pushed him from a mere PvP dispeller come crowd controller, which he was really good for, into a Chronos legend. So his first skill effectively steals turns from his targets by absorbing up to 45% of their AP. This puts him in a grand place for general PvE, right? So like for example Chronos and Temporal Tower, I think he excels in those aspects, so S tier for me. Next up, Nama. Okay, so he currently has the highest upper ceiling of DPS if you're able to stack his passive 8 times, leading to his massive AoE dealing a lot more damage, ignoring 40% of the enemy's defenses, and then further reducing its own cooldown to 2 for the rare occasion that your AoE did not already sweep the enemies off the table. So he is one of the few Espers that truly scale multiplicatively when used with the Ripple Esper, Dahlia, so they work really well together, Dahlia and Nama. Now Raven, the Shimmer Esper. Okay, so while she serves very little purpose outside of PvP, she makes up for it by being the strongest dispeller in the game. So along with her dispel, she also deploys defense breaks, which makes her the ultimate counter against Gabriel Comms and Dona defenses, which are also the most popular defenses right now. And just in case the enemies are not already cleaved, her second skill inflicts AoE buff blocker and reduces HP cap, which makes her a great choice against tanky setups. Case in point, Dona defenses, which is currently the endgame meta, so double S for me. Next one we have Sally. Okay, so undeniably one of the strongest supports in the game. She excels in the mid game onwards with the ability to reduce incoming damage your allies receive by 25% and also heals and purifies them whenever they take a turn. So her skill makes tanky comms resilient against single target damage nukes, and she finds tremendous utility in all PvE content, so easy double S. Next up we have Tang Xuan, so while he has a ton of self buffs, they are too random and they aren't useful enough, leading to his subpar DPS. However, he makes up for possibly the most premium fodder farmer, so I'm actually using him for fodder farming right now and he does pretty well in that sense, so B tier. Next one we have TA, so she is currently the fastest global speed lead in the game and is a great crowd controller with not only debilitating effects, but also an AP push for your own team. So this sets her up to be essential in the speed meta, but also carries a ton of versatility for PvE content as well. She will easily be SS rank if not for the fact that her third skill is easily nullified by just a single Gabriel. So as long as you have a Gabriel, she is completely useless. I mean, like, basically her third skill can't do anything, and you cannot even push her AP up as well, so therefore she's in the S tier and definitely not SS. Now Tricky. Okay, so while he does not serve the same offensive purpose of dispelling just like how Raven does, he is a primary counter against Clara comms due to his passive and can effectively prevent your team from receiving nukes, debuffs and control effects with his AoE miss rate up. He finds tremendous utility in very specific Temporal Tower stages though, which in most cases are also the toughest stages, which is why he has so much value and therefore S rank. And now finally we have Unas. He is in my opinion the highest rated Esper in the game for me for several reasons. Okay, so he has an unconditional 30% AP push for the entire team on top of being the fastest Esper in the game, making him an essential Esper for many PvP comps. To add, upon taking his turn, he then grants his allies a turn of immunity, and his first skill also lands defense breaks. This is extremely useful for Fafnir and pretty much all Ritual Miracle bosses. He has limitless utility in every facet of content, and he is everything a Shimmer Esper deserves to be, so double S for me. And now finally moving on to the new Espers in the game, we have Hei and Bai. So this is white and this is black. Hei is this guy, Bai is this guy. I'm only going to consider these two Espers together, so these are the two twins. So should you only have one of them, they are not as good and I would chuck them theoretically into the C tier. They are both rather gimmicky and can be strong in PvP with their immense controlling potential. However, I would value their efficacy in the Temporal Tower where they can stack slows, stuns, AP control, defend breaks, and Seer, making them undeniably a powerful duo, so I think they both deserve to be in the A rank to say the least. And then finally we have Sienna. She is a great addition to the current roster as an offensive support capable of massive crowd control, speed and attack buffs, which serves a lot of purpose for the Temporal Tower. At the time of this recording, currently it is not known to me what her leader buff will be, but if she has a global or PvP speed lead, then she will completely decimate the tier list and potentially sit atop every other Esper at a triple S ranking. So right now I'm just going to put her as a S ranking pending her leader buff. And finally, we have Teva, the new Shimmer legendary Esper. In my opinion, he's just wheelbait trash with an over-reliance on taking multiple turns for his burst to be useful. So he's not really that useful. A simple Purify nullifies him entirely, so he will make C tier for me. So that will be it for this tier list. I hope you found this useful. I hope this was a good guide for you. This is not a solution, by the way. This is not an answer to like where these espers definitely stand. This is not a directive at all. And if you have any opinions or comments or questions, you can leave them down in the comment section below. I will answer you as soon as I can. So that will be it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Subscribe for more dislike content. And share this video with your friends if you found it useful. And this has been Free to Play, by the way. And as always, I will see you in the next video.